Good afternoon, and welcome to Who Knew? Today you're in for a real treat as resident Susie Frazier interviews resident Dr. Eugene Trani. Susie's going to actually do the formal introduction, but before we get to that, I just wanted to share that in case we do not have time for questions at the end of the interview, you are invited to catch up with Dr. Trani on your own and ask any questions that you may have. So now I'll turn it over to Susie so we can get to the main event.
Whitney, and thank you, Dr. Trani, for being here, for all the time and effort that you and your Chief of Staff, Sam Mesmer, have been put into this program. And also we thank Jordan Sarve for putting together the images for us today that Dr. Trani will be referring to. You and I first met on the stage at the Coliseum in Richmond when you hooded me for the PhD. Yeah. And I was thinking, all these years have passed, and who knew that we would end up as residents of Westminster Canterbury, much less on another stage talking about your life. In any event, it has been an incredible experience and privilege getting to know you the last 4 months, and I'm sure that the audience is going to feel the same way after this hour with you. To the audience, welcome, both here live and also on TV 970 and on YouTube. You're going to get some talking points today so that when you meet Dr. Trani in the hall, you'll definitely have a few things to discuss with him. But may I also encourage you to read or check out one of his 11 books, the latest of which is on the screen. It's called Fulfilling the Promise, Virginia Commonwealth University and the City of Richmond, 1968 to 2009. It was published in 2020 by the University of Virginia Press, and it has an excellent foreword by Senator Tim Kaine. This is a rich history of RPI, MCV, and VCU, and I believe it was best described by John T. Castine III, President Emeritus of the University of Virginia. Dr. Castine said, "For anyone who cares about Virginia, Richmond, VCU, and their people, this is the book. It rings true, and yet it tells the intensely personal experiences of the women and men who conceived and crafted a great university for the Commonwealth. All royalties are given to the VCU Foundation for scholarships. We're very fortunate that Dr. Trani and his co-author, John T. Kneebone, gave 2 copies to our library here at Westminster Canterbury. But if you've been affiliated with Virginia Commonwealth University, you may want a copy of your own. And you can purchase them very reasonably priced at Amazon.com for $35. So buy a book and support a student. It's a win-win situation. Dr. Trani has been a household name in Richmond and in Virginia for decades. But we have new residents here, and we have relatives and friends who are watching on YouTube who may not know him. So we hope that this introduction will be helpful in setting the stage for the interview. Eugene Paul Trani was born November 2nd, 1939 in Brooklyn, New York, and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. After graduation from Monsignor Bonner High School, he went on to the University of Notre Dame, where he received a Bachelor of Arts in History in 1961. He earned a Master of Arts in 1963 and a PhD in 1966, both from Indiana University. Dr. Trani began his academic career in the history department at Ohio State University, where he taught from 1965 to 1967. From there, he became a faculty member in the Department of History at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. He was tenured there and became a full professor in 1975. From 1976 to 1980, Dr. Trani served as Assistant Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Nebraska. In 1980, he was appointed Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Professor of History at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. During this period, he was also a senior Fulbright lecturer in American history at Moscow State University in Russia. In 1986, he became Vice President for Academic Affairs of the University of Wisconsin System and was tenured as a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In 1990, Dr. Trani became the fourth president of Virginia Commonwealth University and served as president of VCU and the Vcu Health System until 2009. During this period, he had 4 short-term visiting research leaves at the University of London, at St. John's, Cambridge, at the University College Dublin, and at Lincoln College, Oxford. The focus of the leaves was twofold. The first was to do research for his books on American foreign policy, and the second was to study the intersection of university and community outreach around economic development. Dr. Trani is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York and the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. He was awarded an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Virginia Union University in Richmond, the honorary Doctor of Science degree from St. Petersburg University in Russia, and the honorary Doctor of Humane Letters degree from Virginia Commonwealth University. Dr. Trani has been married to Lois Elizabeth Nee Trani since 1962. They have 2 children, Anne and Frank, both of Richmond, and 5 grandchildren. Richmond has been home to the Tranis since 1990, and in February 2019, they moved to Westminster, Canterbury, where they live in the courtyard. Are you ready for some questions?
I am, and thank you for that kind introduction.
Well, it's very deserving, and I didn't cover nearly as much as I could have. Okay, Dr. Trani, as I've studied your life and read your book, well, actually several of them, a number of personal qualities emerge consistently in your life story. They are devotion to family, service, vision, and achievement, all traits of leadership. Can you tell us how these attributes were formed and nurtured?
Well, certainly they were nurtured by my family. That is an iconic picture of my father on the steel of the George Washington Bridge. Notice all the safety equipment that he has. Growing up, that was my impression of what engineering was. He was a civil engineer graduate of Cornell University, and this was his first job after leaving Cornell University, was working for the Port Authority of New York. And certainly he stressed education along with my mother, so there was strong family roots on that. I would like to say there are 2 very important dates in my life. One is coming up soon. On June the 2nd, 1962, it was my great fortune to be married to Lois Elizabeth Quigley, who is here in the audience, and I would ask her to stand up, please. 60 years turns out to be a very long time, but also a very enjoyable time. And the second date is July 1st, 1990, when I became president of Virginia Commonwealth University.
Well, you originally planned to be a lawyer, didn't you?
I did.
What happened?
Well, first of all, this was engineering for me, so I decided I did not want to become an engineer. I'm not very good with heights. And I thought, I studied history at Notre Dame, which was a very good choice for me. A little footnote there, I'm a cradle Catholic. Grammar school, high school, college, and when I graduated from high school in Philadelphia, what is called Archbishop of Philadelphia, John Cardinal O'Hara, later made it very difficult to get transcripts sent from Catholic high schools to non-Catholic universities. So my father was a Cornell graduate, and all of my life I wanted to go to Cornell. And you had to make a personal appeal to Archbishop O'Hara, and I eventually did get admitted to Cornell, but that was so far down the pike, and I was very happy to go to Notre Dame, and it did very well by me. So there was strong family nurturing, and there was a very good structure of education in terms of Catholic education.
Was there a person that changed your mind about going from law into academia?
Yes. His name is Robert Farrell. He was a professor of history at Indiana University, and he served as a visiting professor of history at Notre Dame in the fall semester of my senior year. And I decided that I so admired him that I really wanted to study under his direction and hope that I could in some way emulate what he was doing for his students. He was an extraordinary individual, and I was very fortunate, we were very fortunate to be able to know him. And I never referred to him other than Doctor, Professor, or Mr. I never called Professor Farrell by his first name. It was just too much for me to get over that. A lot of his other students, and he wound up with dozens and dozens of doctoral students, wound up calling him by his first name, but I could never do that. So he had a profound impact on me.
Thank goodness for Dr. Farrell. And I really understand your problem with not being able to call someone Dr. Trani, anything but Dr. Trani. Let's see. Okay. Our focus today is going to be mainly on the important decisions that you made for VCU. But before we get to that, can you tell us the best decisions you've made in your lifetime?
Well, I indicated the first best decision was to marry Lois Elizabeth Quigley, and the second was to have 2 children and 5 grandchildren and enjoy them over the course of the years. That is a picture at the dairy bar of the 5 grandchildren and I having breakfast. I think I illegally violated the law because I did not have 5 safety belts in my car. But that is very important to me. My children, both of whom moved to Richmond after we were already in Richmond. and they liked Richmond so much, and we're pleased to have them here, and then the 5 grandchildren.
You and Lois have always been a great team for coming up on 60 years. And I believe you told me that for decades you have been involved in 2 Catholic schools in the Richmond area. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, the 2 schools that I've become involved in are All Saints, which is in Ginter Park, and St. Joseph's, which is in Petersburg. Both Catholic schools, but with a significant non-Catholic and minority population attending both of them. And there has been a major problem with Catholic education from 1961 to today. The Catholic population has remained the same. It's the same today attending Catholic schools like in Philadelphia as it was in 1961, but it had gone up 4-fold, 5-fold during the course of the period of time from 1961 till they began to decline. There were over 5 million students in Catholic schools. There are less than 2 million students in Catholic schools right now. And what concerned me was a lot of those school closures, and there have been 1,600 of them, have been schools in urban centers with heavy minority populations, many of whom are not Catholic. And that certainly was the case for All Saints and St. Joseph's. So I have worked to keep schools like that open. There is a very interesting book that was published by 2 law faculty members from the University of Notre Dame by the University of Chicago Press in 2014, and it's called Lost Schools, Lost Communities. And it raises the issue of when these schools are shut, and as I said, there have been over 1,600 Catholic schools that have been shut in the United States, the communities go at risk as well, even though the local people want to keep the schools open. So I have been involved in All Saints and St. Joseph's, which turns out to be the oldest Catholic school in Virginia, and at one point was the only fully accredited school in Petersburg. Think about that for a second. So you can see why people want to go to Catholic schools, whether they're Catholic or not. But it's those 2 schools that Lois and I have been involved in.
So you really wanted to pass on what you had to give the opportunity to
Yes.
others to have the same excellent education you
Yes.
received in a Catholic school.
Yes, and I'm pleased to say that both of those schools are doing well. There's approximately 200 students at All Saints in Ginter Park, about 100 in St. Joseph's in Petersburg, and they have white students, a significant portion of African American students, and a very significant proportion of Hispanic students through a program called the Segura program, which has raised the possibility of these recent immigrants to the United States and now residents of the Richmond metropolitan area sending their children to Catholic schools.
Admirable. Shall we move on to VCU? I think you enjoy talking about that occasionally.
I do.
The late Dr. Grace Harris, former provost and vice president of VCU, knew you from the beginning in 1990 until you retired in 2009. She said, and I quote, "Dr. Trani saw the whole picture, what makes for a university." In this photograph, we see some of the transformation at VCU during your tenure. But what prepared you to make the vast number of weighty and complex decisions to make one university out of two schools?
Yeah. In 1976, I became an assistant vice president for academic affairs at the University of Nebraska, and then moved to the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and then moved to the University of Wisconsin system. And I had experiences that prepared me to come to VCU and to think about what was possible here at VCU and in the community of Richmond. So the first thing I learned about was governing boards and the importance of governing boards in the lives of universities. The second thing I learned was the importance of having your own governing board for the university rather than in being in what is called the university system. The University of Missouri system, 3 campuses, the University of Wisconsin system, many, many campuses, the University of Nebraska, 3 campuses. So the systems are important because what the system does, it protects the land-grant university against new universities, new activities coming from those universities. So an urban university like Virginia Commonwealth University would have suffered dramatically if there was a university system, and a major focus of the university system was to make sure that everything was well with the College of William and Mary, the University of Virginia, and Virginia Tech University. We have our own governing boards, and that was something that attracted me to VCU, was there was a governing board. And I was also attracted to the fact that we were in a state capital, because Richmond is the 4th state capital I've been in. Columbus, Ohio, when I taught at Ohio State. Lincoln, when I was an administrator at the University of Nebraska. The University of Wisconsin-Madison, Madison being the capital. And they have a certain flavor and a certain relationship with their hometown universities. And that attracted me. Ron Carrier, the legendary president of James Madison University, always used to say he could be in Richmond within 3 hours to see any member of the legislature that needed to be seen. I could be in their office in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That turned out to be a dramatic advantage for Virginia Commonwealth University because the legislature, while they asked a lot of questions about VCU, also came to understand how important VCU was for education in Virginia and of Virginians.
So all of those years working at different universities, especially the ones in capital cities and the ones with medical centers.
Yes.
That was good on-the-job training.
It was tremendous on-the-job training. At the University of Missouri, Kansas City, I had every dean reporting to me, dean of medicine, dean of pharmacy, dean of the conservatory, and it allowed me to see how those parts can come together. And so the most important political decision for the university was to make the decision that VCU would become a university. It was not a university. It was a collection of high-quality professional schools: medicine, dentistry, nursing, pharmacy, allied health professions, School of the Arts, School of Education, School of Business, School of Mass Communications. They were all very good by themselves, but the question was, what could you make by putting them together where there would be cooperative programs? And so clearly building a university-wide culture was early a very important issue for me, because VCU was not a university. It was a collection of professional schools, but it has become a university.
Change the slide to this one. Can you orient us and the audience to these two images side by side on the screen, please?
Yeah, they are of Broad Street, and tremendous development took place along Broad Street. So we made the decision we were going to become a university, and we were going to integrate as much as we could the campuses and the schools. And the second important decision was to grow, and we grew while I was president from 21,764 students to 32,284 students, of which 19,000 were Virginia residents in 1990, and 27,000 were Virginia residents in 2008. There were a total of 1,600 freshmen in 1990 and 3,700 in 2008. So what we went from was to grow enrollment from a commuter part-time university to a residential full-time university and grow the enrollment. That was a very important change that took place for the university.
That was a 30% increase in enrollment, which is an impressive number.
Significant.
The period. We're looking at this slide and the dramatic physical changes to the infrastructure and the aesthetic of Richmond. You're a scholar and a professor and an administrator, not an urban planner. To have achieved this, you must have worked hard to create relationships with business, government, and community leaders. Can you reflect a little bit on those political activities that needed to take place for you to act in this way?
Yeah, certainly among the most important physical decisions was to grow the campuses and define them as campuses. So for example, for the Monroe Park campus, by the way, it used to be called the academic campus. And guess who resented that? Were faculty members at the medical center. What are we, chopped liver? We're academic as well. So one of the things that the board accepted my recommendation after soliciting faculty input was to change the name of the then academic campus to the Monroe Park campus. And for that campus, not to go south into Oregon Hill, but to go north to Broad Street, which eventually led to the Siegel Center, pictured here, and then followed by moving east Belvedere with both engineering and business. So what that shows you is the dramatic growth that has taken place on Broad Street, defining the Monroe Park campus. And it's not just athletic facilities and parking decks and residential. The Mary DePillars School of the Arts building, recently dedicated in his memory, is on Broad Street, which is the home of painting and printmaking and sculpture, all highly ranked national departments. So that gives you a little bit of the flavor of the changes that have taken place along Broad Street.
You've talked about Monroe Park and that campus and your approach to building in that particular part of VCU. Can you tell us a little bit about the changes that were made on the MCV campus?
I want to stay on the Monroe Park campus for a second.
Okay.
The most important academic decisions that were made on the Monroe Park campus was to bring the schools together, but to set up a school of engineering, which started with 500 students and has now over 2,000 students, and has become a major linkage between the Monroe Park campus and the MCV campus. So that School of Engineering changed a lot of what has gone on in terms of Virginia Commonwealth University, and that plus the continued excellence of the School of the Arts and the other professional schools has really helped define the quality of what the Monroe Park campus is.
It certainly has.
You asked about the
MCV.
campus.
Yes.
I think among the major changes that took place on the MCV campus was to build a front door for the hospital that was built in the 1980s. There was never a real front door, and what that entailed was working closely with the city and shutting 12th Street and putting the Gateway building there, which becomes the front door for the hospital where people can be dropped off when the construction gets done. And that was a major change for the MCV campus.
Mm-hmm. The hospital. And then what was built around the MCV campus too, right?
Yeah.
Biotech Park?
Yeah, well, first of all, there were a lot of new buildings that were built. A new school of allied health professions, a new school of nursing, significant construction for the dental school, and a brand new school building for the School of Medicine. So there was a lot of change taking place in that. But the other thing that I think was very important was the creation of what is called the Vcu Health System now. It started out as the MCV Hospital Authority. It had to go to the legislature. It was introduced and supported by Governor George Allen, and it, in effect, created a second unit under the general rubric of Virginia Commonwealth University. There is Virginia Commonwealth University, which is all teaching and research on both campuses, and things like libraries and student affairs. And there is the health system, which is the clinical activities of Virginia Commonwealth University. And that has its own board. There is overlap between the two boards, but there are other people that are appointed by the governor, by the legislature. And in fact, now there are 5 members of the faculty of the School of Medicine who are on the board. So it is the VCU Health System, which was the major change. And combining that with the new construction that went on downtown, and also with setting up the Virginia Biotechnology Research Park, as it used to be called, changed the nature of what that whole area around the medical center was. If you'll recall, it used to be parking lots. There was almost nothing else down there, but you wound up with the state forensics lab, the state laboratory, the UNOS, the organ transplant, a lot of agencies, both public and private, locating down there, and that preserved and made even more distinctive the medical center.
Fascinating. On a light note, I've discovered you have a delightful sense of humor. And I think you said you'd be willing to tell us the most embarrassing moment that you had at VCU.
And this, I'm told, I've not even seen it. You have seen it.
What?
You've seen it on the web.
I have. It's filmed on the web. I have, yeah.
In 2001, Mark Warner was elected governor. And the Board of Visitors had decided to honor Lois and myself by naming the new Life Sciences building in our name. Very appropriate for Lois being a retired nurse anesthetist and a life scientist who in fact gave up her career in nursing when she came to Richmond and took on the duties of the First Lady of Virginia Commonwealth University. So they picked a date in 2001 for this dedication of the building. And it got canceled because of 9/11. And in the meantime, Mark Warner had been elected governor and would serve as governor from 2002 to 2006. And we got him to make one of his first appearances as governor-elect in late 2001. And he was going to make remarks at the dedication of this building. And I had one simple job to do. And that simple job was to introduce him and say, and now it gives me great pleasure to introduce the governor-elect of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mark Warner. And I got up and I said, and now it is my great pleasure to introduce the governor-elect of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Mark Early. And I groaned. And quick as a flash, Governor-elect Warner said, "Thank you, President Castine, for that wonderful introduction." And a lot of people thought that was a setup. It was not a setup. It was, without any question, the most embarrassing moment that I've had professionally. And you can see Governor Warner became a great supporter, and Senator Warner of Virginia Commonwealth University, and of Lois and I personally.
So he didn't hold a grudge.
He did not hold the grudge.
That's wonderful. We're glad. You know, excellent leadership involves choosing the right people. Can you tell us what you were looking for when you first came and during your tenure? What were you looking for in people when you hired them?
First of all, I wanted people who were very smart and had experience in their area. And one of the great hires that we were able to make at Virginia Commonwealth University was to hire Paul Timrick, who had been Secretary of Finance for Governor Allen,
yes.
and before that, Governor Wilder. And my wife had stayed out of university business in those kind of affairs, but when I was looking for a new vice president for finance and administration, and I happened to report who the candidates were, she said to me, "You need somebody who the legislature and the governor and all state officials are going to respect." And that turned out to be Paul Timrick. So clearly I wanted people who were really smart and who had great experiences, and that's what I did. The picture there was
pretty special for us who are alumni and for Richmonders. I think it's when the basketball team made the Final Four of the NCAA championship in 2011, and none of us would leave home because we were glued to the television.
That was certainly a dramatic event in the history of Virginia Commonwealth University. And that picture is of Coach Shaka Smart. And that was the last major personnel recommendation that I recommended to the Board of Visitors, was to hire Shaka Smart as the basketball coach at Virginia Commonwealth University. And the Final Four run occurred after I had left office, but he and I have a special relationship. We still do, and that picture is one that I will treasure in terms of the importance to VCU. That event of going to the Final Four gave so much pride to the students, the graduates, the friends, the supporters of Virginia Commonwealth University. I cannot emphasize how important that was in terms of the history of making this one university. And it was interesting to see the support that came to the university and its basketball team from the medical faculty on the MCV campus. It was something that everybody could rally around, and there was no question that event was seminal. And I'm very pleased that among the dust jacket blurbs for the book is one from Shaka Smart.
Yes, it is a very nice one too. Well, as you mentioned, staying in the city of Richmond and the two campuses and no major branch campuses was part of your original vision. However, when you retired, VCU had developed international reach in the creation of partnerships with 16 universities worldwide, 13 with academic medical centers. Why did you make those partnerships a priority?
First of all, we live in one world, and we're sadly learning the difficulties of that one word with the awful events that are occurring in the Ukraine right now. But I decided that a lot of the partnerships that Virginia Commonwealth University had were single faculty member partnerships, where a faculty member got interested and became friendly with people from another university. And what I decided was what we needed some university-wide partnerships, and those partnerships should replicate what the university was trying to do by bringing together a medical center and a university. So as an example, and the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, were clearly high priorities for me, because I believed there was going to be an awful lot of economic development that was going to take place in the BRIC nations. So we had 2 partnerships in Russia, 2 partnerships in China, a partnership in Brazil, a partnership in South Africa. And all of those universities had medical centers, integrating a university with a medical center. So that was the thrust behind a lot of those efforts.
Well, you're speaking of relationships with countries around the world. Can we move to your foreign relations expertise now, please?
Briefly.
Pardon me?
Briefly.
Yeah. You have written extensively on U.S. relations with China and Russia. And in 2006, the International Herald Tribune published your opinion in this area, and attached was this caricature that we're seeing on the screen. Can you tell us about your views then? And also, I think you're working on a related manuscript now. Could you give us a sneak preview?
Sure. Let me say something about that. I thought I did a brilliant op-ed piece that appeared in the International Herald Tribune. That caricature was so much better than my op-ed piece. Because this shows President Hu Jintao, who preceded the current Xi Jinping as president of China, and him motioning for the leader of Russia to come over because they were having difficulties with the United States. That is my major concern, is that Russia and China come together and neither one of them would have any love for the United States, and in their own way would like to see us suffer. I will tell one story from my time at Moscow University, and that is that they sent me to other universities, and one city and university I went to was in Chechnya. This was before Chechnya was destroyed by Putin and rebuilt according to how he wanted. And I was to give 2 lectures in Chechnya. We arrived on a Sunday, and I was to give a lecture on Monday and Wednesday. And the lecture on Monday was an auditorium of about 250 people, most of them students, with the party elites sitting in the first row, second row, with questions and answers after I talked for a while on American politics and American foreign policy. I invited questions, and a number of students had questions. And one question was, what did I think of the recent dispatch of Soviet troops to Afghanistan? And I thought for a second, and I said, mark my words, Afghanistan will turn into the Soviet Union's Vietnam. I got thrown out of Chechnya. They sent me back to Moscow. They did not want me to give a second lecture, but it gave you a sense of the control that was exerted then by the Russian government and still today. It is an enormous tragedy what is going on in Russia. And I have worked on American-Russian relations for now 60 years since I went to graduate school. And what I am trying to do is just think about American-Russian relations over the period of that 60 years and how I have changed my views on what is possible and what is not possible. And I must say, I am as discouraged now as I've ever been in terms of American-Russian relations.
Well, do you have time for one last question?
Sure.
A colleague described you as a combination of a Renaissance man and the Energizer Bunny. And that's true. But it's curious that you were able to carve out some time for recreation and fun. Would you tell us some of the things you like to do besides work?
Yeah, I am a sports nut.
You are.
So I have a number of teams that I follow and have followed for years. I am a graduate of Notre Dame, and Notre Dame football is very important to me in my life. VCU men's basketball is very important to me in the development of VCU basketball, and it's great tradition since the 1980s. So I'd say they'd be at the top of the list. Having spent time in Kansas City, I became a fan of the Kansas City Chiefs and was pleased to see them win a Super Bowl and compete at the highest level. And I am a long-suffering A's fan because I grew up in Philadelphia. And when you grew up in Philadelphia, you either like the A's or the Phillies, and I like the A's. So I followed them to Kansas City and now Oakland. And they've had their ups and a lot of downs over the years, and who knows if they will even stay in Oakland. But so I'm those sports fans, and there is one other team that I have rooted for the last 20 years. Do you know anything about English soccer and the Premier League? I have been an Everton fan for 20 years, who has been a mid-level club out of Liverpool and on the verge of being relegated, sent down because they have 20 teams that play at the top level. And every year teams 18, 19, and 20 are sent down. And it could well be that Everton, for the first time in its 60-year history, or 70-year history, will be relegated. So I am suffering with that. I am also interested in politics, and I'm very interested in history, and try to read a lot, and enjoy those things.
Do you play any golf?
I have played golf over the years, but I think golf may be getting beyond me these days. But it is a wonderful sport, and it is interesting to see the young people that are coming, and the heroic efforts of Tiger Woods and what he has done by even being able to play in the Masters.
Especially after the accident.
Yes.
Incredible. Well, do you feel like taking some questions?
No,
I think we have a little bit of time, don't we, Whitney?
We do. So we can, does anybody in the audience have a question or two? Jessica can come around with the microphone. We covered a lot of material here. I see a hand right up front. Okay. Here you go, Ms. Giblin.
I cannot hear you.
Hold on 1 second.
Now I can hear you.
Here we go.
I only moved to Richmond in 2011, so I'm pretty new. But I've heard people say this, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. People say, VCU is great, but it's taking up so much of the city tax base that it's a problem.
So much of the city what?
The tax base. So much of the property of the city belongs to VCU that it's a problem for taxes. Is that just...
First of all, that is a problem with universities located any place in the country. It's a problem in Blacksburg. It's a problem in Charlottesville. I think there is an effect that is not understood, and that is the care that is given to City of Richmond residents from the Vcu Health System that is uncompensated. The City of Richmond is one, I think, of only 3 cities in the country, major cities in the country, that does not contribute to the support of public health. All of the money that is needed to take care of City of Richmond residents is provided by the university and by the state. So I think that may offset a lot of the tax base issue. But there is no question that VCU has a lot of space in Richmond, but also the state capitol has a lot of space, and it is just what Richmond is.
I always thought myself that the incoming students who end up staying here made up for it.
Yeah, that's a major advantage if you look at the population, the workforce of the Richmond metropolitan area. So many students come and stay and pay taxes. So you are dead right that that is another effect overcoming some of the difficulties of the tax.
Dr. Trani, what do you think is the biggest challenge for VCU's future?
I think that higher education is going to have to change even more in the future. And I think that the historic model of higher education will be undergoing change. Now, I happen to believe that it is very attractive for students to come to a metropolitan area like Richmond and study, and for certain kinds of students, that is much preferable than going to Charlottesville or Williamsburg or Blacksburg. They want the environment of a city. So I think we have to take advantage of that, and we have to make sure that that gets incorporated into our curriculum as much as possible. And I'm pleased to see a lot of the efforts that are taking place now to get students involved in those activities. There's a major civic activity that's taking place that you may not know about, and it may be worthwhile to get people to come and talk about it. The I-64 corridor, I think we would all agree, has enough pancake houses. Do we agree on that? What else could be located on the I-64 corridor? And there are people from the Norfolk area and from the Richmond area that are working on that issue and have identified 4 topics other than pancake houses that ought to be really stressed. One is logistics, I-64, I-95. The second is data collection, all of the data centers that are being located in the Richmond area. The third is the life sciences, and what VCU is doing and what other institutions along the I-64 corridor are doing. And the fourth and final area is defense, because of the major presence of the United States military and defense-related research facilities. So those 4 areas, I believe, are going to be very important for the I-64 corridor, which you can obviously extend all the way to Charlottesville and include the University of Virginia. And I believe that the future of VCU will be even more involved in those areas, and that will be very, very significant.
Well, we are just at 4 o'clock, and so I want to say a big thank you to both Dr. Trani and Susie Frazier. This has been wonderful.
And as you see me walking the halls, please say hello.
I think we can all agree that we absolutely will. And real quick, before we leave, just want to tell you about May. And in honor of spring, our Who Knew in May will feature resident Scotty Arnest, who's the chairman of the WCR Flower Committee and who turns everything she touches into beauty and service. Scotty will be interviewed by resident Ann Archer. So this will be on May 18th here in the Sarah Bell November Theater, so you aren't going to want to miss it. And thank you again to both of you. Very eye-opening and a lot to think about today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been my honor.